What if I told you that while Americans are being told one story on television, a completely different reality is quietly unfolding behind closed doors, involving foreign oil, secret bank accounts, and decisions that could reshape global power without your consent? Because what came out during a recent Senate hearing was not just shocking, it was unsettling in a way that should make every taxpayer stop and think. And once you hear this, you will never look at international politics the same way again. Before we go any further, if you care about truth, accountability, and the stories that rarely get told the way they should, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with your thoughts, because your engagement helps keep independent voices alive. And now let us get into what they never wanted most people to fully understand. During a tense session inside the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a top American official was questioned about something that until now had been discussed only in fragments, carefully buried under technical language and diplomatic excuses, and what emerged from that room was confirmation that an enormous amount of money generated from the sale of foreign oil is not where most people assumed it would be, and more importantly, not under the kind of oversight Americans are usually promised. This was not a rumor, not a leak, and not speculation from anonymous sources, but testimony given under oath in front of lawmakers, cameras, and the public record. The issue revolves around oil that was sold under sanctions. Oil that was publicly framed as being sold for the benefit of a struggling foreign population. Oil that many believed would be carefully tracked, transparently managed, and responsibly delivered to those it was supposedly meant to help. Instead, lawmakers learned that a massive portion of that money is sitting untouched in a foreign bank, outside the United States, beyond immediate public scrutiny, and protected by a legal structure so complex that even senators seemed alarmed by how little clarity actually exists. When one senator pressed the official directly, asking whether it was true that hundreds of millions of dollars from these oil sales were still sitting in a bank account in another country, the answer was not denial, not deflection, but confirmation. Yes, the money was still there. Yes, it had not yet been transferred. And yes, this arrangement was intentional. That moment alone should have raised eyebrows. But what followed raised far more serious questions about accountability, transparency, and authority. The explanation offered was that the account was temporary, that eventually the funds would be moved into a blocked account under United States Treasury oversight. But that promise came with an important detail that many people missed, because while there were assurances about auditing how the money would be spent in the future, there was no clear commitment to auditing how much money was actually received in the first place. That distinction matters, because auditing spending without auditing income leaves a massive blind spot, one where funds can quietly disappear without anyone being able to say when or how. Even more troubling was the admission that the bank holding this money is located in a foreign country with no obligation to provide transparency to the American public. That means there is currently no direct way for taxpayers to know exactly how much money passed through this arrangement, how long it will remain untouched, or what mechanisms exist to prevent misuse before it ever reaches its intended destination. In simple terms, the money is real, the control is limited, and the oversight is incomplete. As the hearing continued, it became increasingly clear that lawmakers themselves were struggling to understand the legal foundation for this entire operation. One senator raised a fundamental question. Under United States law, money received by the government is typically required to be deposited into the Treasury. So what legal authority allows funds tied to oil sales to sit in a foreign bank instead? The response was revealing, because the official insisted that the money was not technically American money, even though the United States was controlling when and how it could be used. This created a contradiction that could not be easily explained away. On one hand, the funds were described as belonging to another country. On the other hand, the United States was effectively acting as a gatekeeper, deciding when sanctions would be lifted and when money could be released. That kind of arrangement does not fit neatly into existing legal frameworks, and several senators openly described it as novel, unusual, and potentially problematic. The justification for keeping the money outside the United States came down to two main reasons, and both deserve serious scrutiny. First, there was an issue of diplomatic recognition, where the United States does not officially recognize the current government of the country tied to the oil, creating a legal gray area about who can lawfully receive the funds. Second, and perhaps more telling, was the concern about creditors. If the money entered an American bank, it could be immediately seized by creditors seeking repayment for outstanding debts, something the administration administration wanted to avoid, at least for now. In other words, the funds were placed in a foreign bank not just for convenience, but to shield them from legal claims that might otherwise be enforced under American law. That revelation alone reframes the entire situation, because it shows that the structure was designed not merely to help a foreign population, but to bypass legal consequences that would normally apply. And when lawmakers asked to see the written agreements governing this arrangement, it became clear that even congressional committees did not yet have full access to those documents. As the testimony unfolded, frustration in the room was visible. Senators emphasized that controlling the disbursement of another country's money without clear congressional authorization resembles a form of financial receivership, something that traditionally requires legislative approval. Yet the official maintained that no such approval was necessary, arguing that the foreign authorities had agreed to these terms as part of the sanctions process. Whether that agreement truly represents consent or coercion is a question that remains unanswered. What makes this situation even more unsettling is the broader context in which it exists. This is happening during a time when public trust in political leadership is already strained, when concerns about corruption, self-dealing, and abuse of power dominate headlines. The idea that enormous sums of money are being managed through opaque structures in distant financial institutions under the supervision of individuals with expansive authority and limited oversight only adds fuel to that fire. Observers have pointed out that history offers clear warnings about arrangements like this, even in past international operations with far more oversight, far more transparency, and far more institutional checks. Billions of dollars were lost, misallocated, or simply untraceable. And those were situations where multiple governments and international organizations were actively monitoring the flow of money. In this case, the safeguards appear weaker, not stronger. By the end of the hearing, one thing was undeniable. What was initially presented as a humanitarian-focused effort now looks like a complex financial and political operation with unresolved legal questions and significant risks. The confirmation that such a large amount of money remains parked in a foreign bank, combined with the absence of full auditing and congressional oversight, raises concerns that go far beyond partisan politics. This is about precedent, power, and the quiet normalization of extraordinary authority exercised without clear limits. And this is only the beginning of the story, because as more details come to light, the implications of this arrangement will become even harder to ignore, revealing how decisions made far from public view can have lasting consequences for democracy, accountability, and the global balance of power. As the dust settles from that explosive testimony, the bigger picture becomes impossible to ignore, because this is no longer just about where money is parked or which bank is holding it. This is about how power is being exercised in silence, while the public is fed simplified explanations that barely scratch the surface. When a government claims it does not technically own the money, yet still decides when, where, and how it can be spent, it creates a dangerous gap between responsibility and accountability. A gap where no one is fully answerable and everyone can point fingers somewhere else if things go wrong. What makes this situation even more alarming is the precedent it sets, because if funds generated from foreign resources can be controlled without direct congressional authorization, shielded from legal claims, and stored outside the reach of domestic transparency laws, then the door is wide open for future administrations to expand this model. Today it is oil revenue tied to sanctions. Tomorrow it could be something far larger, far more complex, and far more consequential, all justified under the same vague language of national interest and diplomatic necessity. Several lawmakers openly acknowledged during and after the hearing that the arrangement felt improvised, something assembled quickly to solve immediate political problems rather than built on firm legal foundations. That matters because improvised systems tend to favor those already in power, while the risks are quietly passed on to taxpayers and future leaders who inherit the consequences. Once a structure like this exists, undoing it becomes far more difficult than creating it, especially when the details are buried under layers of classified agreements and bureaucratic handoffs. Public reaction has already begun to reflect this unease, with critics pointing out that trust cannot survive in an environment where massive financial decisions are made without clear oversight. The argument that this is being done for humanitarian reasons rings hollow when there is no full accounting of how much money entered the system in the first place. Compassion without transparency is not policy, it is branding, and branding does nothing to protect people from corruption, mismanagement, or abuse of authority. History has shown time and again that when large sums of money move through international channels without strict checks, the outcome is rarely what was promised at the beginning. Funds meant for relief often get redirected, delayed, or diluted, while those responsible insist the process is simply complicated. Complexity becomes the shield, and the public is told to trust the system without ever being allowed to see it clearly. That is not how democratic accountability is supposed to work. What troubles many analysts most is not just the current situation, but the mindset behind it, the idea that legality can be stretched through creative interpretations, that transparency can be postponed indefinitely, and that oversight can be treated as optional rather than essential, reveals a deeper shift in how power is being justified. When leaders grow comfortable operating in gray zones, those gray zones tend to expand, slowly redefining what is considered normal until extraordinary control becomes routine. At the center of all this is a simple but unsettling reality. Enormous financial influence is being exercised by a small group of decision makers based on agreements that the public has not seen, under rules that are still being debated, with safeguards that remain incomplete. Whether one supports or opposes the broader political goals involved, this structure should concern anyone who believes that authority must always be matched with accountability. This story is not about one hearing, one official, or one bank account. It is about the slow erosion of clear lines between who owns resources, who controls them, and who answers when things go wrong. Once those lines blur, restoring them becomes a fight, not a policy adjustment. And by the time the public fully realizes what has changed, the system is often already locked into place. That is why conversations like this matter, because silence is what allows complicated arrangements to become permanent realities. Awareness is the first step toward accountability, and accountability is the only thing that prevents power from drifting too far away from the people it is supposed to serve. This is not the end of the story, but it is a moment where attention still has the power to shape what comes next. If this video helped you see the bigger picture, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives that cut through the noise, and comment below with your perspective, because your voice matters more than ever, and together we can keep these conversations alive.